are live. My name is John Paul Berg, and this is The Way Forward, a weekly podcast regarding monetary reform and Douglas social credit. Today, we will be discussing tariffs and trade wars, with the tariffs back in the news relative to Trump's 50% tariff recently. I think it would be a good time to explain this from a Douglas social credit standpoint. So with that said, I'll throw it right over to you, Oliver, to get us started.
Yeah, I think that perhaps this question of trade is actually one of the easiest ways of introducing the subject of Douglas social credit. It's one of the easiest entry points, perhaps. Douglas social credit says that because of the way the financial system is designed, whenever we produce anything, we're generating costs and prices at a faster rate than we are simultaneously, automatically distributing income in the form of wages, salaries, and dividends with which those goods and services can be purchased. So there's a chronic underlying deficiency of consumer buying power. And this is something that the system has to compensate for, because otherwise goods and services won't be sold, businesses will go bankrupt, and so on. So there's always this pressure, this internal pressure, to find some form of compensating for the underlying gap. And one of the palliatives that the existing system has come up with, which is in use, is this idea that you can export more than you import, right? You can achieve a favorable balance of trade. And so the idea there is that instead of trading goods for goods, you export in financial terms more than you import. So if you export $100 million in goods and services over the course of a year, then the idea would be to try to import maybe only 60 million, because then that $40 million difference is basically money that through the profits and through the wages and salaries of the exporting companies, that's basically a free gift to your domestic economy with which other goods and services can be purchased. So favorable balances of trade, so-called, are ways of lessening the gap, narrowing the gap, because on the one hand, you're getting rid of some of your production, so you don't have to sell it domestically. And you're also trading not in exchange for goods, but trading in exchange for money tokens. And you can use that additional purchasing power to buy other goods and services in the domestic economy for which insufficient income has been distributed. Now, this makes sense under the existing financial system, which is structurally dishonest. But I want to stress that from a realistic or from a physical objective point of view, if you export more than you import, that's a dead loss in physical terms. You're actually giving away real wealth, goods and services, and you're not getting goods and services in exchange. You're just getting money tokens that in principle you could have created yourself in order to distribute the surplus production. So I'll stop there for now, but that sort of lays the ground of how Douglas social credit assesses this pressure for each country to try and export more than it imports, try to obtain a quote unquote favorable balance of trade.
So what are your thoughts regarding this, Sanjay?
Well, first thing, I wanted to emphasize on the fact that we are all globalists. We live in a global economy. And since 1972, I think 73, we abandoned the gold standard, and currencies are competing against each other. So countries, they need a reserve of foreign currency because they want to either balance their commercial balance, like Oliver was mentioning. So, and the global economy forces us to either import or export. So it's amplifying the problem. If you have a national economy that consumes their good at the rate at they are produced, you should not have to export or import goods, and you should not have to keep this type of, I would say, reserve currencies. One thing that I've noticed is that we have those commercial balance because the economy is global, but it is not new. It is not since 2000 or 1994 or 1972. The global economy is much older than that. After the First World War, everything was reoriented politically, and we started to see big multinational taking control of the economy, so that they are controlling the system from above, and they're forcing government either to create deficit to compensate for what Oliver is always mentioning, the gap. If you have a global economy, you could say, I will export what other peoples cannot produce if I have satisfied my interior needs, meaning that you would have a fair exportation without creating discrepancy in your own system. Same thing with the importation. One other thing that I can mention is that we should be able to export knowledge. Because if I have knowledge and another country doesn't have this knowledge, I should be able to at least share this knowledge with other countries, which would be Juan Castro Soto, who's a social creditor, was saying we should replace the word competition with cooperation, which means countries would not compete against each other. I think Trump always see, for example, Donald Trump, he always referred to competition. What about collaboration? And that would maybe reduce the what we call today the trade war, because the trade war is what? It's supposed to protect your economy, but in reality, it does not protect citizens. It amplifies the problem. And I think it will just put in the shadow the system of Douglas, because Douglas would arrive with a system where you would fill the gap nationally, and then after that you would most probably appease the international conflict, what we're seeing now, for example, in Iran, or with the European Union or Ukraine or China. And that's my understanding now, toward what could be a geopolitical strategy to implement the system of Douglas.
So prior to coming to Douglas Social Credit personally, I was kind of a fan of like Milton Friedman, and I think frequently to his speech regarding the pencil. I'm sure you gentlemen are aware of this, where he talks about how this pencil exists because of globalization and integrated markets, and he's making a case for free markets. And it seems like some of the problems, it's reliant on our integrated economies and globalization and all these free trade deals. That's what seemed to kind of be the catalyst for a lot of these problems. Does that make sense, Oliver?
Well, I think that historically, if we go back far enough, we had in the economy, we had a problem with scarcity, physical scarcity. And the idea there was, well, if each, let's say, region or nation concentrates on what it can produce most efficiently, and it trades with what other countries can produce most efficiently, then we'll be able to produce more overall, and we'll both be better off. This goes back to Ricardo. But with industrial production, that's no longer the case, right? Physical scarcity has been banished. And so it's not, the problem is not to produce more. We can bury ourselves in goods. So that historical justification for trade, I think, is very largely now redundant. And the reason that certain ideologues nevertheless push free trade, in my opinion, is it allows, let's say, multinationals, transnationals to buy in the cheapest markets and to sell in the dearest markets. So from the point of view of wanting to maximize financial profits, if you happen to belong to the sectors of the economy that are in a position to take advantage of those things, then you're going to support free trade because it basically gives you the ability, the freedom to exploit and to maximize a financial return. And then if you're operating in an economy where there is this gap, this lack of consumer buying power, all of these activities that capture purchasing power, whether fair or foul, they become incentivized, right? But from a Douglas social credit point of view, within the context of what we have now, industrial abundance, the only reason under a sane financial system, one that accurately reflected reality, the only reason that any country should trade would be because there is something that you can't produce at all, or you can't produce easily. And some other country has something that you have that it can't produce at all or can't produce easily, and you would exchange goods for goods. So ideally, trade on this view should be an exchange of complementary, balanced goods and services that do make us both better off because we're exchanging the surplus, something we've produced that we don't really need, that the other country can't produce, and vice versa. So just as a concrete example, we can produce maple syrup here in Canada. They can't produce it in Mexico, but in Mexico they can produce bananas or oranges, which we can't produce here. So it makes sense for us to trade our maple syrup in exchange for oranges, right? And as I say, under a sane financial system that allowed each nation to purchase in full whatever it produces without having this gap, that would be the only sensible purpose of trade. You wouldn't trade for the purpose of trying to capture additional purchasing power in order to compensate for your own chronic price income gap. And the other aspect of this we should mention is that this game that we play that's so unnecessary, that is simply the way we have to play the game because the financial system, which is a construct, doesn't automatically allow us to buy in full what we've produced. The result of that is, well, it's a zero-sum game, right? Not all countries can export more than they import. So countries are competing against each other basically for survival. They're trying to compensate through this particular palliative for their domestic deficiency of consumer buying power. And for every country that is successful and that is able to export more than it imports, there's going to be a country that is going to end up importing, in financial terms, more than it's exported. So while the one country has its gap problem partially alleviated, the other country that has an unfavorable balance of trade is going to have its gap problem intensified. And to put it into context with everything that's going on, in the last 25 years, I'm going from memory, I believe for about 80% of that time, 20 of those 25 or 26 years now, Canada has actually exported more to the United States than it's imported. So in terms of the trade war, Canada has been more successful using trade with the United States as a means of compensating for its own chronic domestic deficiency of purchasing power at the expense of the US. And that is, although it's not really articulated as clearly as I'm doing now, or from the point of view that I'm doing it, I think in the background, that is one of the things that Trump is annoyed about and he's trying to address with the tariffs.
So essentially there's winners and there's losers under this model, and that kind of creates its own problem. What are your thoughts on that issue, Andre?
Well, trade, I would say, how did I put it? Free trade or fair trade, in a sense that when you are bigger than your opponent, you will always win. Friedrich Nietzsche was writing, and he said that justice is only possible between two actors of equal strength, which means if you're bigger, you will always be able to impose your will on other countries. I can refer to, for example, the Bank of International Settlement. Practically all countries are under the structure of the Bank of International Settlement, except a few countries like Iran, North Korea. Even Russia is part of the Bank of International Settlement. It's quite fascinating. So they are part of this structure banking system. I will not call it a cartel. Let's be diplomatic. It's a system, and they are forcing big players, or big players are having a monopoly on production, distribution. We can see it with the what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Actually, it's a war of titan, but because in the expression trade war, you still have the word war. So trade, tariff are weapons. They are weapons, and they're not helping citizens. I think, in a sense, if we would implement a system that would not permit monopoly over credit, or monopoly over creation of money, or monopoly over the life of people, we would probably eliminate all the aspect of the trade war. There would be no need for tariff, because you would have a balanced economy, production equal consumption, and you would say to let's say a country, that a neighbor that would say, well, you're producing, can you produce more? Not you're producing, can you produce more to supply us with your goods without disturbing your own economy? And we will produce more, and in exchange, and we will not destroy our own economy by overproducing or creating scarcity, because you create scarcity and you export. The example of maple syrup is quite funny, because the province that produced the most maple syrup in Canada, it is Quebec, and they are exporting 35% of their production to China. Are they satisfying all the interior market, like, for example, Canada? The answer is no. So why? You produce more because you generate revenue, and you will use those revenue to provide income, and then you don't have the maple syrup for the rest of Canadian. That's exactly what Oliver is describing. We're always talking about the gap. How come we are exporting goods and services? We can talk about the money that we're giving to Ukraine, actually, while we are watching our own economy collapsing in real time. This is unsustainable, if we can use a environmental expression. It is not sustainable. The system will just fall and collapse.
I think Canada is unique too, because we have a lot of provincial barriers for trade, which is really weird for other countries to wrap their heads around. Me as well. So I have another question. We do have some videos ready, and I will let everyone know we will get to the questions towards the end of the show. But what does trade look like under a Douglas social credit system, Oliver?
Well, as I was describing, it would be under Douglas social credit, it would be in the interest of every country to be as self-sufficient as reasonably possible. And, a financial system that accurately reflected reality, which enabled a country to catalyze its production and to distribute its production, would be in a position to achieve that to the extent that it's physically possible. And at that stage, we should only trade for, as I say, for things that we cannot produce within our own borders or cannot produce easily. And other countries should do the same. And basically then trade, in a Douglas social credit world, no country would be seeking to export more than it imports, because all their economies would be balanced. They'd all have sufficient income to offset the costs of what they produce. And to export more than you import in that set of circumstances would be revealed as the irrational thing that it is, because it could only induce demand pull inflation. You would be parting with some goods and not getting goods in exchange, but getting mere money tokens in exchange. And but since you have enough income already to purchase whatever you've produced in the domestic economy, you're just increasing the money supply, and you'll have demand pull inflation, and prices will go up. So there's no incentive to export more than you import in a Douglas social credit system. And we'll talk about it, I suppose, probably after the first video. But the other thing here that needs some attention is that under the existing system, because all these countries are struggling to get the upper hand, to have a favorable, quote unquote, balance of trade over and against their trading partners, and it's a matter of survival, it's a matter of economic survival, this is a tremendous incentive. Well, it induces conflict, right? So yes, you can have trade wars where you've got things like quotas and tariffs and currency devaluation and special trading agreements and things like this. But sometimes countries are so desperate, and if, as Andre was saying, if they've got the power, they just might skip to the military solution, and they might use a military intervention under some pretext to perhaps destroy the productive capacity or part of the productive capacity of competitor nations. And that way, going forward, you won't have to deal with them in the international arena, and you'll be able to sell more than you import. Or you might try and seize their resources for yourself, or you might try to defeat them militarily so that afterwards you can impose trade conditions, which are favorable to you going forward and not so favorable to the enemy. So we had talked about this off camera yesterday, I think, and you might want to speak to it too, JP, just a little bit about the history of World War I and what was really going on behind the scenes, because what you read in the textbooks about, this is what really started the war, unless the historian is aware of all these financial and economic factors and pressures, they're generally omitted from the history books, right? So you're not getting the full picture of what actually sparked these wars in the first place.
So I was watching. It was actually funny enough. It was the central banker Richard Werner was on Tucker Carlson, and he was explaining how all wars are bankers' wars. And he went into World War I, and he was saying England wasn't in great shape. Like the Allies against Germany in that conflict weren't doing good. And there was some kind of a deal made with the financial interests. If they were to get America into the war, there would be the Balfour Declaration, and Israel would be established. And that was kind of the plan, the homeland for the Zionist movement. So then the Lusitania happened, which is kind of, again, there's no way to vet this, and your orthodox interpretation of history does not support it, so to speak. But I'm a firm believer that was a false flag intended to directly bring America into the war. And then World War I and the deals made, created the conditions for the Weimar Republic, and then that led directly to World War II. So, I mean, there's always financial strings being pulled behind the scenes that seem to play these nations off against one another. And again, it's like I say, these conflicts only serve Satan and bankers. That's it. It doesn't do the countries any good that are involved in them. So it's definitely interesting. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, it's important what you just mentioned, John Paul, about who's benefiting from this. Trades and or tariff and retaliation. I never saw a big multinational being punished. Even Google in Europe was fined, I think, $2 billion. But it's nothing compared to their to their income or their profit. The other thing that I want to mention is I think it's in one of your podcasts you were talking about energy and prosperity, and people are mixing prosperity and progress, energy and prosperity. And in the system that we're living in, actually, we do not have prosperity. We have progress, which means technology is progressing. Big companies, big group, they are making a huge amount of profit after 2008, after the 2008 crisis. The profit were skyrocketing up to the point that companies were buying back their stock because they had to increase their liquidity. That's one thing. The other thing is we have, when I say trade and retaliation, it's you exchange through import and export. I think about China, rare earths that are necessary for the military complex. You have the nanometric technology that goes into drone, for example. Canada is supplying parts for Ukraine actually now. The other thing is gas, oil, that and uranium. So it's like there's a huge international market, and they're benefiting from this monopoly of finance because they can raise a lot of money to implement war, which could be start by trade. It start by when you don't agree on trade, you start tariff and retaliation, and if it doesn't work, what you do? You start a war, and then you can, like Trump said, we will have full employment. Wow, I'm impressed. Full employment with creating weapons and missile to destroy economy. Wow, this is not progress. And it's certainly not prosperity. So I think what you're mentioning, John Paul, First World War, Second World War, are we going to the Third World War? I don't know. But the monopoly of banks were fueling those conflicts. They benefit from it. You supply weapons for both sides, so you benefit. Some people, they say, everybody is against war. No, the military complex, it's their business model. They need war to make money, and they need war to increase their power. I think a system like the system of Douglas would probably eliminate all those, I would say, let's be polite, differences between nations.
I think so. I definitely do. Yeah, there's a direct correlation between energy and prosperity in any nation. It's very obvious. And I remember now it was the Treaty of Versailles that created the economic conditions in the Weimar Republic, which kind of helped prop Hitler up. Plus, I firmly believe that a lot of these banking interests funded that directly, as that's what it seems to kind of seem like when you're reading the history. It's like they want the tension. They want to play sides off each other in this strategy of tensions. But with that said, we're about a half hour in. We're approaching 100 live viewers, which is pretty good. So if I could please appeal to everyone to share the stream, it's very advantageous for us. And I just want to remind people, leave your questions. We get to them towards 45 minutes to an hour in. We'll switch to the questions portion of the show. So with that said, I think it's probably a good time to show the first video, which I shall do presently.
Episode 7, A Favorable Balance of Trade. We are often told that countries should export more than they import, should strive after a favorable balance of trade in order to be prosperous. But what if this isn't exactly true? According to the social credit analysis of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, countries that export more than they import are actually suffering a net loss of real wealth. They are poorer in physical terms than they were before they began to trade. How can physical impoverishment yield financial prosperity? And why do countries compete so viciously internationally for export markets? The answer lies in the dishonest and dysfunctional financial system which governs our economic activities. You see, under existing banking and cost accountancy conventions, we are never automatically paid sufficient income to buy back in full whatever we produce. This means that each country is laboring under a chronic lack of consumer buying power in its domestic economy. One way of addressing the imbalance is to export more than you import. Doing so allows a country to get rid of some of its surplus production, for which no income has been distributed domestically, while simultaneously importing additional consumer buying power in the form of the wages and profits of the exporting companies. The gap between prices and incomes is thereby closed in two directions. Markets can be cleared and production costs met. Equilibrium can be achieved. But the prosperity associated with a favorable balance of trade is a purely financially grounded rather than reality-based phenomenon. If we follow its logic, the most favorable balance of trade possible, and hence the greatest prosperity possible, would involve a country exporting all of its production and importing nothing in return. The exporting giant would then have lots and lots of money, but no real goods and services to spend it on, and the real economy would collapse as the citizens starved. This thought experiment, by taking the favorable balance of trade policy to its logical conclusion, is just one way of demonstrating the extreme dishonesty and irrationality of our existing financial system. The current system, by rewarding things that actually involve physical loss or inefficiency, such as favorable trade balances, often commends what is physically evil as being financially good. Seeking favorable trade balances is also a zero-sum game. Not all countries can export more than they import. For every winner, there must be a loser. This pits countries against each other in a life-or-death struggle for economic survival and social stability. This unnatural competition thus serves as the prime factor behind international friction and war. But there's a better way of filling the gap that doesn't involve giving away your surplus production in return for mere money tokens. It is the Douglas social credit way. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit.
Okay, Oliver, I'll throw that right over to you. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
One point that we haven't yet talked about that is mentioned in the video is sort of the inner logic of the system and what it incentivizes. We talk about favorable trade balances. Yes, you must try to export more than you import. That's the thing to do. That will make you prosperous. That will make you successful. Under that logic, if you, for example, export $100 million worth and you import 60 million, okay, that's a favorable balance of trade. You've got a surplus there of 40 million that you can then use to, help compensate for your domestic deficiency of consumer buying power. But then logically, if you export 100 million and you only import 40 million, then that's even better. That's a favorable balance of trade plus, right? And if you take this to its very logical and absurd conclusion, where you export everything you produce and import nothing, you'll be very, very wealthy in financial terms, but you will have absolutely no production for people to buy within the domestic economy. And what's the end of that? So you have a situation basically where, because the system is structurally dishonest, it's dishonest from the get-go, doing something that's actually harmful, doing something that's actually, if you like, evil, parting with goods and services that's cost you something in terms of raw materials, labor, real capital, parting with it and not getting some goods and services in exchange, but merely getting money tokens, that's a loss. That's a physical loss. You're poorer in physical terms than you were before you began to trade. But the financial system says that's a plus, because now you've got more buying power with which to fill the price income gap. So that should be sufficient indication the system is rotten. It doesn't reflect reality. As I mentioned before, under a Douglas social credit system, if you exported more than you imported, you would just be inflating the domestic economy with additional purchasing power that you don't need, causing demand pull inflation. And that would be an indication immediately to everyone that we shouldn't be doing that. It's a physical loss, and it's also costing us financially.
It reminds me of that old saying. I think it's attributed to the Hopi Indian tribe, but only after every tree has been cut down, every fish taken from the ocean, and every animal hunted will man realize that we can't eat money. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Oliver mentioned demand pull, and you have, if I'm not wrong, cost push, which are two concepts that will create this gap. Oliver was mentioning something about the production on the territory. For example, I was struggling last year when I started to read social credit economic, because I was trying to find an example that would illustrate what Oliver just mentioned. Producing car, for example, on a territory. Let's say you produce 10 million cars that are not consumed. What do? You don't sell them. You have to keep them in store, or you export them. And you export them because you produce too much car for the needs, because you want to provide income for people. And this is quite interesting, because you provide income, you export cars, and you still have a gap, and people, they go to food banks. So what we were saying in the small video, overproducing something that you don't need just to provide income. I'm sorry, it's not moral. In a sense, you still have poverty, you still have people who go to food bank. And I go back to what you were saying, John Paul, energy and prosperity, and not energy and progress, because the difference between progress and prosperity is very important. Some people will progress and other will lose. In the small clip, you see it. If you have a winner, you have a loser. That's an economy of competition. While Douglas social credit would promote most probably an economy of cooperation, and then you would maybe see commercial balance. They would shrink, in a sense. I think the system is so dysfunctional. People, they cannot see it. They just see wealth. We go everywhere. We see cars. I was just watching, the car dealer, used car dealer or new car dealer. You have cars everywhere that are parked. And you say those assets, they were there just to provide an income based on, for example, car loan. So it's quite fascinating that the system is so dysfunctional that people don't see it anymore. It's like it has become normal. And when we talk about social credit and we talk about balancing the equilibrium between production and consumption, people, they don't know what we're talking about. It's not that complicated. You produce and you consume what you produce. With the income, money at this point is not even relevant.
Yeah, the system has definitely been normalized, but people are oblivious to the gap. They don't understand that it's there. And that's what's creating this chronic deficiency of purchasing power that keeps us in this perpetual state of scarcity at an individual level and as nations that are competing in this globalization model. So it's kind of the double whammy there. So we got about 120 watching. I will appeal one more time for you to please share the stream. It's the only growth we get. And we're about 40 minutes in, so I'm going to go ahead and play the second video, and then we'll do a round of regarding that, and then we'll get to the questions. So I want to also appeal to anyone. If you have any questions, there's no bad questions. We know that there's a lot of people that are just encountering this. Please feel free to put them in the comment section, and I promise you we will get to them.
Episode 27, Social Credit and War. We are often told that war occurs due to faults in human nature, i.e., because of the vices of greed, pride, hatred, and so forth. But what if this isn't exactly true? According to the social credit analysis of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, much of modern warfare can be traced back to a very different cause.
The financial system is beyond question the chief cause of international friction, since, as we have seen, no nation can buy its own production. A struggle for markets in which to dispose of the surplus is inevitable. The translation of this commercial struggle into a military contest is merely a question of time and opportunity.
Social creditors have repeatedly warned that there is a chronic economic cause, entirely artificial in nature and therefore unnecessary, which inexorably leads nations to take up arms against each other: the price-income gap. The underlying deficiency in consumer purchasing power afflicts all industrial societies operating under standard banking and cost accounting conventions. These countries are pressured to alleviate the lack of liquidity in the domestic economy by seeking to export more than they import. A so-called favorable trade balance, which is actually unfavorable in real terms because it implies a net loss of real wealth, helps an economy to fill the gap between the prices of consumer goods and the consumer's incomes. It does this by getting rid of part of the surplus production, while at the same time increasing the flow of purchasing power to consumers through the jobs that are created and the profits that are obtained by the exporting companies. The problem is that it is mathematically impossible for all of the nations in the world to export more than they import. It is a zero-sum game. For every exporting champion, there must be a loser with a trade deficit. Countries that import more than they export are left with an even greater gap problem. Since every country is forced to operate under the same internal deficit of purchasing power, the struggle for a favorable trade balance constitutes a struggle for survival. This leads, quite naturally, to economic conflict, or rather, to economic warfare, in the form of commercial wars and free trade alliances. And this can spill over all too easily into military conflict. A country that does not manage to compete successfully through innovation, hard work, and the achievement of lower prices in comparison with its rivals can choose to ensure its victory through war, i.e., by defeating its economic opponents on the battlefield. Such a war may allow the aggressor to destroy part of a rival's productive capacity, to seize resources and/or, through the eventual signing of peace treaties, to insist on more favorable commercial conditions for itself as part of due reparations. The real reason for the war will, of course, be more or less hidden from the public and a pretext found. Indeed, war itself can be regarded as a form of government-funded exportation, since government borrowing is one of the main methods for bridging the gap, and national security provides a convenient excuse for a massive increase in such borrowing. Nations which are unsuccessful in conventional export warfare can fill the gap by spending on overt warfare. The whole purpose of a war, then, is to dump as many bombs and shells on the enemy nation as possible, without allowing that other nation to dump any of its exports in the form of armaments on you. Once again, a ruse involving an external threat or enemy will be manufactured. Naive souls seduced by appeals to glory, loyalty, and sacrifice will be harnessed as cannon fodder in the service of economic and occult political objectives, which they do not understand. The pressure placed on nations to compensate for their internal price-income gaps via favorable trade balances is intensified by the universally defended policy of full employment. If we madly insist in direct opposition to the real physical potential of the modern economy, that all or almost all must work in the formal economy in order to obtain purchasing power or be supported by those who do, then we are demanding continual economic growth as a means of distributing additional income as the population grows. The resulting production must find some outlet. If it cannot be absorbed internally, a market must be secured for it abroad. It was for this reason that John Hargrave, leader of the Green Shirts, a paramilitary social credit group of the 1930s, audaciously proclaimed on more than one occasion that
he who cries for full employment cries for war.
As an alternative, we could fill the price-income gap along social credit lines. The result? The main impetus to modern war would disappear overnight. Until these hard realities of economic life, however stupid they may be in their origins, are dealt with on a rational basis, all appeals to pacifism must fall on deaf ears. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit.
So I just want to let everyone watching know, if you go to YouTube and do a search for Douglas Social Credit, that animated series will come up first thing, and there's 42 videos, and it's an excellent resource if you personally want to know a little bit more regarding this. So that's essentially like explaining a bit of like what's been known as the military industrial complex. What are your thoughts on this, Oliver?
Well, I was looking at this particular episode. I think it's episode 27 today. I hadn't seen it in a while. And I thought, that's a really good episode. I mean, I was quite pleased with it, looking at it again. But it only has something like 850 views on YouTube, so it's it's one of those mysteries of the universe, But I think what's interesting here, something we haven't explored yet, from another point of view. I mean, yes, war can be used to destroy the productive capacity of the enemy, or insist on more favorable trade arrangements after the war. But from another point of view, war itself is sort of taking the whole export more than you import aggression to its logical conclusion, because you are, by dropping bombs and missiles and those sorts of things on foreign territory, you're basically exporting some of your production. You don't want anything in return. You don't want them to be bombing you back. And since this is now government-funded exportation, deficit spending, it's a wonderful, fantastic way of filling the gap domestically. And historically, what broke the Great Depression? For many countries, it was the Second World War. You had, paralyzed production. You had people that didn't have sufficient consumer buying power to buy even the insufficient flow of goods and services that were coming onto the market. And this was a purely financial phenomenon. This wasn't because the sun stopped shining, or the rain stopped, or that the domestic productive capacity had been destroyed. There was no physical damage. It was purely the financial system wasn't playing ball. And then they decided, we have to have this war to stop Hitler. And all of a sudden, finance starts to be cooperative again. Unemployment disappears, production increases. You can now buy everything that you're producing in the domestic economy because you've got all this extra income and profit. And the Great Depression disappeared, but it came at the cost of the Second World War, which was tremendous destruction. Millions of people died or were injured. All sorts of infrastructure, housing, factories were destroyed in various countries. So it came at a very high price. But you could look at war as just taking the favorable balance of trade business to another absurd logical conclusion, where in order to keep the domestic economy going, well, let's get involved in wars, and let's let's feed the military industrial complex. And if there's not a conflict, well, let's invent one, because people need jobs. We need to have full employment. We need to distribute more income. And if you fill the gap the way Douglas recommended with the national dividend and national discount, you can render the financial system self-liquidating. And you don't need all this extra activity, which in the case of favorable trade balances or wars is actually destructive. You don't need all of this in order to make the financial system work. Financial system is already operating on a sound basis. So it is really like the answer for world peace, introduce a social credit type system in every country, and the main impetus to warfare vanishes.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think back to Iraq too, and you look at, like, first they decimate it, and then they go in and there's lucrative opportunities for the reconstruction contracts. Like, we watched Halliburton, which I believe Dick Cheney was a major holder of. So he kind of goes in, they take care of it, and then they go back and they rebuild it. So it's definitely generating income in that regard. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, you're referring to Iraq more recently. We have Ukraine in Brookfield, which is the same modus operandi. One thing that I've noticed in the small video, for example, currencies versus innovation. The fact that currencies are competing against each other creates a lot of insecurity and lots of antagonism between multinational or countries. And the fact that you don't have a favorable commercial balance would incite you to maybe to create something that will try to balance your economy, which doesn't never work, because they always try to fill the gap, for example, with overproduction or deficit. That's one thing. The other thing, let's not forget that in the Second World War, men were going to war, so women came into the labor force. And it is funny because it was in reference to at least you have women who arrived, they freed themselves from the system. Then the war ended, they didn't want to go back to their oven. But the companies the financial system were very happy because they could grant them more loans. It's always creating money out of nothing and trying to, I'm sorry to say this, enslave people. One other thing that I've noticed is when you have currencies that are competing, if it doesn't work, you can devaluate your money, try to make your goods and services more competitive in a way. It's always competition instead of cooperation. And when we think about what is happening actually, the war in Iran, nuclear energy is innovation. It's a discovery. It should benefit to the entire humanity. So Iran should have the right to enrich uranium for civil purposes. And this is what is fascinating with the JCPOA. They were supposed to have this deal, and then Trump arrived and he just ripped off the deal, saying that you will not have nuclear energy. Wait a second, nuclear energy, it's an innovation. The other thing is, you see now a lot of companies, not companies, but nations that are integrating their economy. Russia is starting to have an integrated economy, a war economy. Russia was always industrialized, even during perestroika. But now they're integrating more, and we're going toward a very big conflict. The last thing that I could say is you talk about sometimes we talk about immigration in Canada. Now a lot of immigrants, they are granted permanent residency if they join the army. So everything is shifting toward hiding the bankruptcy of the system. And like they said, and like Donald Trump said, we will create full employment. I think it's not moral. It's immoral.
I agree. So with that said, this takes us to the question and answer portion of the show. We kind of stalled out at about 120 live viewers, so I will appeal one more time. If I could please get you guys to share the stream, it's very helpful for us. And just to let you know, put any questions in the comments and we will get to them. So, first question, Mr. Jose Bernier says, this is a timely take on economic warfare through the lens of social credit economics. So that's a little comment first, and then we have some questions following up. We have one from Gary Halicki. I'm still waiting for Ronald Reagan's trickle down, the old trickle down economics. We're all still waiting for it to trickle down. I don't think that's how it works. So here we have Jose Bernier. England and the US used protectionism until they attained absolute advantage on manufacturing. They promoted free trade to economically subjugated other countries. What are your thoughts on this, Oliver?
Yeah, that sounds right. One of the things that Douglas says about the First World War, and he was British, he said that for a very long time, 19th century, England being the world's first country to industrialize, was known as the world's workshop, and they exported everywhere, and they didn't have any competitors. But then Germany industrialized very, very quickly, and was starting to threaten those export markets. And of course, it's a zero-sum game again. If Germany takes away England's export markets, then how is England going to fill its price-income gap, especially if it was relying on that to such a significant extent? And so, from Douglas's point of view, amongst other factors, that was one of the things that caused the First World War.
So yeah, it's like this gap perverts the incentive, and it creates the need to essentially look at everyone in an adversarial regard instead of a cooperative regard. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, that's what I was referring to before, when I quoted Nietzsche, justice can be achieved only between actors who have equal strength. I think Mr. Bernier took this idea from Baron Metal, the book of E. Michael Jones, because Michael Jones is referring exactly to what Mr. Bernier is talking about. Gaining an absolute advantage on wool production at the time, and after that they were flooding the German market with I'm sorry to say this, cheap production, not cheap in terms of quality, but cheap in terms of price. Yes. And they were forcing the German to increase their production. They could not compete. So you just flood the market, you push people to bankruptcy, and then you can raise your price. That's basic capitalism. That's what I call predatory behavior. It's if all classic neoclassic economic believe in this, I say they're all predators.
Very good. So we have returning viewer, Mr. J.C. Denton. He says, this is a long shot, but would DSC contribute to the safeguarding of free speech in any ways? Thank you. So I think definitely. I think by its very nature, it's disempowering a lot of the government. It's totally disenfranchising international finance, which is what we're all under the auspices of presently. What are your thoughts regarding that question, Oliver?
So the answer to that is absolutely yes. And I can't pull them up at the moment, but there are all sorts of quotes from Douglas's works where he talks about the importance of financial and economic independence if you're going to have anything that's worth being called free speech. So in a Douglas social credit world, if everyone's receiving a national dividend, and that's your right as a shareholder in your economy, as an heir to the cultural heritage, then if somebody, like your employer or the government even, decides to do something crazy that they shouldn't be doing, like mandating COVID shots on employees, you have an option. You can say, well, I've got my dividend. You can take the job and shove it, right? A lot of people went along with the COVID shots, for example, because they felt rightly or wrongly, that they had no other options. And it was either that or starve. But if the very nature of the financial economic system enfranchises people, and you're distributing dividends and you enjoy compensated prices, it gives people a certain amount of security and insulation, so that if somebody doesn't like their political views or whatever, they get sanctioned or they lose their jobs. It's not It doesn't mean starvation. It doesn't mean destitution, right? So without that, you can have free speech in theory, but not really have it in practice. I taught for a number of years in Arkansas at a university, and Arkansas is a right to work state, quote unquote. So what that means in practice is that there's no union. Not, unions can be good or bad. It's a double-edged sword in many ways. But in that state, it was prohibited to even form a union, right? Apart from the question of whether it should be mandatory or not, you couldn't even form one. And what I noticed, having started to teach there after being in Cape Breton for a year, was that there was a spirit of fear on campus. Like, you couldn't, in Cape Breton, I could talk to people about politics. It was okay. But you went to Arkansas and, you'd ask about something and all of a sudden it was hush, hush, and people didn't want to reveal what they actually thought about things. So you're at a university, which is supposed to be a bastion of free speech, but because people are so vulnerable, there's no protection. You're not getting free speech. So it's and this is in the land of the free, home of the brave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the only right, I think Douglas said that the only rights you really have are those you can sustain, right? It's no good just to have it on paper. You've got to have the sanctions to back it up if it's challenged. And yeah, if you had an honest financial system that actually enfranchised people as a matter of course, we would all be a lot more secure. And on the basis of that security, would also be a lot more free.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It's like there's a direct correlation between your socioeconomic position and your agency, like the ability to say no. Because a lot of people are totally reliant on that paycheck. They're just barely keeping their head above water in this economy. So they're far more malleable from a governmental standpoint on getting to kind of herd the flock around. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, I think, when you think about the system of Douglas, we also have to think about what Oliver was mentioning, scarcity or the pressure on people, and the moral code that we lost for many years, if not decades. And true, we can use the expression natural law, but you can also use the expression God's law, or and if you don't have this pressure, maybe I think man is a good animal if you direct him in a good way. Maybe greed would be less attractive. And people would start to say, wait a second, I do not want to comply. They would most probably be able to express what they call free will. And with free will, you can decide to have free speech. Then free speech, I'm sorry, you cannot say everything. You cannot say everything. You need to be articulate. You need rational discourse. We refer to logos, reason. Maybe we would reinstate reason with a system that is more fair. And not by threatening people like we saw during the pandemic or false pandemic.
So just while I'm at you, Andre, Mr. Denton has a critique regarding your tie. I don't know if you have anything to say to Mr. Denton.
I will send it to him
personally
by mail.
Very, very good. Okay, so we have Johnny Tightlips. Am I correct to attribute the current fiat system in which there are always losers, as all cannot export more than they import with crypto? Any thoughts on that, Oliver?
I'm wondering if you can restate the question.
Yeah, it's a little oddly worded, Johnny. I will say though, I was always a critic of a fiat system, but Douglas Social Credit operates on a fiat system. It's just reflecting reality. It's the true source of economic association to deliver goods and services to the people. So fiat would be the most effective or efficient way to do that. Do you want to essentially just expand on that a little
Well,
bit?
I could expand on that. Yeah, from a Douglas social credit point of view, the main concern in any financial system is what is the policy of the system? What is the objective of the system? Is the objective the common interest of the citizens? Or is the objective to enhance the power, the wealth, the privilege of an oligarchic elite? Right? Those are your two basic options. So any system is going to be somewhere along that spectrum to a greater or lesser extent. And the key thing is not what money is made out of, but how well does the system function? Does it reflect reality, or does it distort, artificially limit reality? The system that we have now involves misdirection, involves artificial limitation, and it doesn't reflect reality accurately. And you try doing anything. If you think of this, Douglas was an engineer. If you think of this more in scientific or engineering terms, if your job, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, whatever activity you're undertaking, if it relies on instruments giving you accurate information, because that enables you to then make proper decisions. What happens when the instrumentation is not giving you accurate information? Right? And basically what we're saying is the financial system, the way it's designed, it's not giving us accurate information. It makes us do things like try to export more than we import, which is a dead loss in physical terms. It's like a form of psychosis that's institutionally embedded in the system.
And we all entirely accept it on some
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Fiat system comes from Latin, and it means trust, to trust people. If your fiat system, any type of system, if you don't have trust, people, or distrust, what do you think people will do? They will stop using it, or they will find another way around. Cryptocurrency, in my opinion, is a symptom of a system that we do not trust anymore. Crypto, and the crypt is somewhere, you hide something. You have crypto. The crypt was the place where you were burying people. So you bury it because you have gold. You bury it in your garden, and you don't want somebody to, because you don't trust banks anymore. The fiat system, because we don't trust the system, because they have a monopoly. They can decide whether we can speak or not, whether we can refuse or accept an injection. They froze the bank account of people who did not want to take the shot. So the fiat system doesn't have any. Nobody trusts the system anymore. That's why I think the emergence of crypto, coupled with technology, we always talk about the blockchain. You cannot hack the blockchain. It's quite fascinating because the blockchain is more and more complex. Why? Because you trust less and less the system. The symptom is there. People are focusing on the symptom and not on the core cause of this flaw, which is a monopoly. Any monopoly will always become tyrannical.
It's a good point. It's like they're looking at to treat the symptom instead of the cause, instead of finding a cure. So I will ask everyone if you guys could please share the stream. It's very helpful for us. And if anyone has any questions, because we're kind of running a little low, please leave them and we will get to them. So we have one from Debbie Fuller, more of a comment. This system really shows the world is actually a dog-eat-dog world where we don't help each other. Unfortunately, Debbie, it is. And a lot of people are under the impression that it must be in order to maintain freedom or have liberty and not live under some socialist hellscape, that we must have this dog-eat-dog conditions. And Douglas Social Credit disputes that vehemently. Would you like to speak to that a little bit, Oliver?
Yes. So
we don't have many questions.
Yeah. Yes. Basically, the financial system that we operate under at present, because it doesn't reflect reality, because it's dishonest, because it's dysfunctional, because it's dishonest, and because it is also artificially centralizing wealth, privilege, and power in the hands of the owners of the system, it means that the whole society, the whole civilization is not on a sound basis. It's not on a level or fair playing field, right? And some people, they may not know the ins and the outs of why and how this is the case, but they can sense it, they suspect it, that something's got to be wrong somewhere. Because maybe, for example, they never get the return that is promised or they think that they deserve in comparison with the effort that they put out. So it's, there are different analogies that we can draw, but if you think of a sporting game, it's kind of like, you're playing this game, the economic game, and the rules are not fair. The rules are skewed in favor of the house, in favor of the owners of the system. And there's nothing inherent in the nature of reality that requires the rules to be those rules. In fact, those rules interfere with people's satisfaction with the game, right? Because if the system, as I say, if the system doesn't accurately reflect reality, how is it going to reach? How is it going to be functional? Right? It can't be functional if it's not based on an accurate representation of the truth. So we have a situation where the rules are skewed in favor of one side, and but also the linesman and the referee are also paid directly or indirectly by the ownership. So even when there's a dispute, it can happen, it often does happen, that in spite of the fact that the rules are already sort of biased and skewed, you're working uphill trying to even get those rules to be respected or enforced, right? Because the people that are supposed to be enforcing it are also dependent on the owners of the system. So it's, the Australians have a very beautiful expression. They talk about a fair go. And prior to the last 30, 40, 50 years of neoliberalism in Australia, you had this understanding that, everyone should be given a fair go. Everyone should be given an opportunity to do something, to achieve something. And that is something that the current system does not give us because of the way that it's designed. So this incentivizes all sorts of things, just as countries are fighting viciously with each other, trying to outdo each other in terms of favorable trade balances. That pattern of conflict is found everywhere. It's found between different employees. It's found between different companies. It's endemic in the whole society, and you can imagine the damage that does to the social credit in the narrow sense of trust, of social trust. It undermines, corrodes social trust, and it incentivizes crime of all kinds. So the dog eat dog. That is the type of world that is induced when you don't have a level, rational, honest playing field.
Induced by necessity. What is your thoughts regarding this, Andre?
Well, I will just correct the phrase, maybe toward dogs eats dogs. I would say some men are wolves for some men, meaning that it's not all men who are predatory, who have predatory behavior. That's the first thing. Oliver was mentioning the fact that the rules are not fair. They're just not fair. It's not that they're just not fair. You can bend them according to your will. We can refer to sport. He was referring to sport. I can go now and compete. I'm 66 years old. I can go and compete with women and pretend that I'm a woman and I will win. You cheat. You just cheat. You cannot win. You're not good enough in one category. And when we think about boxing, for example, you have two men, same weight. If I'm 175 kilogram and I go compete with this 85 kilogram man, I will win. That's That's nature. It's not very complicated. So if you start to cheat, there's no moral, and you can bend the rule up for your own desire or your own appetite. I think that today the idea of the monopoly, we always refer to the monopoly of bank, but the structure, the system, they are giving a very bad example of human behavior. And people are copying now more and more this system, like you were saying, John Paul, normalizing what is not normal. Today we talk about, for example, the deficit. Every year we do a deficit. This year it will be what, $85 billion in Canada. It's normal. It's not. There's no opposition. They don't even try to oppose or to say it's immoral. They don't even talk about it anymore. It's normal. It's normal, not a problem. Next year it will be $150 billion deficit. It's normal. It's not a problem. The interest on the debt are increasing, skyrocketing. We will have to cut some social program. Oh, it's normal. Everything is normalized. Like I remember Jacinda Ardern, the ex-prime minister of New Zealand, and they were all having the same script. Welcome to the new normal. This is not normal. It's like what I was talking last week. Negative growth. They're using oxymoron everywhere just to confuse people, and people after that they're at each other's throat because they want to find the reason why they're so in despair, and they cannot. So we have to calm down and look who is really creating this hopelessness.
Very good. So we have another one from Johnny Tightlips. If a newly established country, for example, if Alberta could actually separate, started using the Douglas social credit system, is it your opinion it would flourish even while no others are using it? That's a very good question. I'll throw it right over to you, Oliver.
Well, a country, like you talk about Alberta, in order to flourish using the Douglas social credit system, it would be going alone, at least initially. It would have to be in a position to, I suppose, do two things, which is to provide the essential goods and services itself. So it'd have to be self-sufficient to a significant degree. And it would also have to be able to defend itself. But I think that if you could run the experiment long enough, it would cause populations in other countries to demand that their governments implement the same system, right? So I think it would become contagious because they'd look across the border and they would see what's going on, let's say in Alberta, and they would want the same thing. In the case of Alberta, we should, of course, mention that there was a social credit government in Alberta elected in a landslide in 1935. And every attempt that they made to implement the system or some aspect of the system was thwarted by higher authorities. So whether that was the Lieutenant Governor General or the courts or the Privy Council or the imperial government, somebody higher up the chain, the federal government, somebody higher up the chain intervened and prevented the experiment from actually taking place. So it's interesting. Douglas wrote a whole book about this. Actually, it's called The Alberta Experiment. You can probably find copies of it digitized online. But it's something that I think would compel imitation, provided that it was operating in a country that, as I said before, could manage to go it alone if necessary.
It's an interesting point to add, but if Alberta did separate, they wouldn't necessarily be sovereign, as they would still be under the auspices of the same international financial oligarchy that they are presently.
Yeah.
So it's that's something to add. Andre, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Oliver stole my line. No, if Alberta could actually separate, I especially like the could actually, and I would say you want to buy a land, buy a gun first. Because if you are the only one who's implementing the social credit system, you will have a lot of people against you. They will not, and even in your own newly established country, there will be a lot of people who will not understand the concept of the gap, because they are, I'm sorry to say this, they are capitalists, classical capitalists, and they will think that you want to implement socialism, which is nothing to do with socialism. It's the total opposite, and it's not predatory capitalism. Then the other aspect is Alberta. Is Alberta sovereign? Who owns Alberta? Albertans or corporation? So when you would have a, let's say, a referendum, they will have one now, and let's say they have a positive outcome. Who will oppose? And they could arrive and they could say, we will impose or we will implement this Douglas social credit system. They will have a lot of enemies, even if they had a good history in Alberta, like Oliver was mentioning, because as soon as you arrive with, you're threatening the power of somebody, you cannot expect that they will not fight back. So what will be interesting, we're in July now, at the end of July, beginning of August, it's coming in what, 3 months, 2 months and a half. It will be more and more important to maybe to understand the system of Douglas, and maybe to integrate it in a process, because I don't see it. And this is maybe a risk for Albertan, because if they arrive and they do vote for a separation, or because it's consultating referendum, but they will trigger a process, and they should integrate something that would challenge the financial monopoly, which is a big problem. The gap and the monopoly.
I'll just add that, had we implemented Douglas social credit when we had the opportunity to do so, nationally in Canada, before John Paul and myself were born, maybe even before you were born, Andre.
I hope.
There would be I don't think there'd be any desire or impetus for Alberta to separate, because all their grievances, directly or indirectly, tie into this dishonest and dysfunctional financial system, which, they may not realize that. But have introduced Douglas social credit at a national level in Canada, and we can be one big happy family.
I like it. That's a good positive note to end on. I will let everyone know that's watching, we receive the majority of our views after the live broadcast. So if you could still share this, it's still very helpful for us. And we do this every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. And I have another project called Social Credit Voices, where I interview different figures from the social credit movement. And we do that every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Excuse me, it's hard to keep track of all of them. With that said, though, we'll see you guys next week. Cheers.